afternoon. My name is Emily Westhoff. I am going to be speaking about student centered coaching and its role in both literacy instruction and as a tool for school improvement. So, to begin, let's kind of get some terminology. Literacy coach, reading specialist, instructional coach, these terms are more often than not used interchangeably. And depending upon the district and how they define that role, may share some commonalities or maybe something completely different. It really will depend upon your district. So, these words literacy coach, instructional coach, and reading specialist. I want you to take a minute and either jot down what you think these mean, okay, what this term means to you, what do they do, or if you like, there is a PDF embedded that allows you to take notes right with the slides. So whichever method you find comfortable, just take a few minutes, jot that down. Okay, so perhaps when I say the word instructional coach or literacy coach, you may be in two different camps. Maybe that is viewed as a district employee who is very aligned with administration, evaluation. Maybe it's somebody who's just there to give you research or, for lack of a better term, sell you the next latest and greatest curriculum that the district has purchased. 9 times out of 10, this is probably what we think as educators. On the flip side, if you are familiar with student centered coaching, or maybe your experiences are quite positive, maybe you feel that a coach is there to help you, to provide, um, instructional practices, to help you implement the new curriculum. Maybe they're seen as a resource. It really just kind of depends. So, according to these two ladies, Miss Diane Sweeney and Miss Leanna Harris, a coach, regardless of the names, regardless of the terminology, is a professional whose purpose is to work with teachers and other stakeholders within the wider professional development efforts of the school system. So, instructional coaching or literacy coaching is underneath that wide umbrella of professional development. So, what does this mean? It simply means that they straddle the line between a district employee and a resource for teachers who are, planning their daily lessons, who are there with the children 5 days a week, 6 hours a day. Okay. It is also one subset of the larger professional development. Okay. So it fits in there. It's there to aid the teachers. Notice that grade level, content areas are not mentioned. With student centered coaching, with this method, it is able to cross the K through 12. It's very highly applicable based on that student's, schools, and district's needs. So it's definitely flexible in its approach. So many of us are used to the teacher being the center of any and all professional development. When you see your instructional coach coming down the hall, maybe you're like, I think I'm going to go take the long way. This idea is typically what we're familiar with. They're there to help you with goals, to write your instructional improvement plans. They're there to mentor new teachers. They're there to, be the resource guru. That's more than likely what the instructional coach or literacy coach at your building looks like. With student-centered coaching, it is a very different aspect. It does not put the teacher at the center. Instead, the professional development is targeted with the teacher to improve student outcomes. It's a partnership. It's not an evaluative capacity at all. It is the instructional coach working with the teacher who obviously knows their students the best, what they need. And it is specifically tailored to meet those students' needs using the state standards as a foundation, along with effective literacy and instructional practices. This graphic right here gets to the heart of this student versus teacher idea, okay? Because it is definitely a reframe of how we think about coaching, okay? When you put the student in the center, you're seeing partnership, you're seeing evidence, student work samples being used to plan, to teach, to see where you need to go. How can the coach help the teacher get those students to experience success and long-term success? Because once the coach leaves the room, the teacher is then responsible for adhering with fidelity. So, how to transition from having the teacher and the coach be focused on that to getting the student in the center. First things first, it's going to start with the job description and the amount of responsibilities the district has assigned the instructional or literacy coach. Okay. Once that is done, it's going to be really up to the instructional coach and the principal to meet, come up with a game plan, how they're going to build this system of student-centered coaching into the school community, how they're going to increase buy-in, and frankly, how they're going to protect the coach's instructional time. We want the coach to spend as much time as possible in coaching cycles with teachers that want to be there. Get more bang for your buck this way. Now, this third bullet point right here is probably the most important. Your coach, whoever that may be, needs to really have these following characteristics: great communication skills, excellent listening skills. That is perhaps the most important when you partner with the teacher. Let the teacher guide those conversations. Okay? Your instructional coach is going to have to be highly organized and still flexible. School days are sometimes, you got assemblies and fire drills. They're going to have to be flexible. And, of course, foster those working relationships. So you're probably thinking to yourself, well, we definitely want to move to this methodology. Student-centered, data-driven, oh yes, please. So how are you going to get there? Okay. In the very beginning, create a list of willing teachers across the divide. Okay. Your veterans, your new teachers, your teachers who maybe been teaching for 4 or 5 years, get those who want to join to partner with that instructional coach first. It's going to increase the success that everyone experiences with student-centered coaching, and it's going to increase buy-in. When the teacher and the coach meet for the first time, you are going to immediately decide, hey, this is what I'm seeing in my classroom. Let's use these 2 state standards and let's go from there. So it starts at the beginning with student data. What is the teacher seeing? What are they observing? And then you're going to use 2 things. One is a student success criteria that the teacher and the coach will collaborate on. That will then turn into the student-friendly learning targets. And that's going to guide the coaching cycle. So a coaching cycle can vary in time depending upon that teacher's needs. As it continues, it is extremely important to have student formative data to guide the cycle. It's a very reflective process. The teacher and the coach should be meeting together, seeing where the students are at, what they've mastered, what they still need to work on, who maybe needs to be pulled for remediation. And at that point in time, you're going to be co-planning with that coach. And even at times, if it's agreeable to the teacher to record, co-teaching. Okay? So as the cycle continues, you want to have some form of data to track the student's growth, right? So typically you're going to start with a pre-assessment. That can either be something like, the state standardized test given at the beginning of the year, or it can be a unit test, or just like a pre-test, whatever it needs to be, it can be used. And that's going to be contrasted with the end, unit exam or the third progress monitoring data to really see how the instructional practices and how the students have met those standards that were chosen. And obviously, the coach will conduct an exit interview with the teacher. What went well? What could they do again? Do they have a game plan for those few kids who are still struggling? And the principal does need to be kept up to date. But once again, with student-centered coaching, the teacher is not evaluated. It's really about the student. So that conversation between the instructional coach and the principal would be something like, hey, this is the instructional practice that Miss, Westhoff was doing. This is the results. I think I'm going to, present this next time we have a PLC, something to that effect. There are 7 core practices within student-centered coaching. I will say this, I would think this would be better as a circle because student-centered coaching is quite reflective and cyclical. It's definitely not a one and done type of approach. It's not like you take one piece of formative assessment and you're like, 50% of my kids got it, go on. This is not that. So to really make this a smooth transition, get your instructional coach to utilize surveys, meetings, welcome letters, trying to hype up this student-centered methodology. Now, the coaching cycles themselves can be really flexible. It can be one-on-one, PLCs, grade levels even. Emphasize that the entire process of student-centered coaching is reflective and data-driven. Now, depending on the individual teacher's needs who partner with the coach, it can last between 6 to 8 weeks or even, 3 to 4, depending on what that teacher is asking for. The most important thing is that it is grounded in the student's, state standards, the learning targets that are created eventually. Excuse me. For a regular coaching cycle, which is about 6 to 8 weeks, 2 to 3 standards. For the shorter mini coaching cycle, 1 to 2. I would not suggest any more than what you see here because it could be quite overwhelming. And it's also very important to celebrate success. After all, that's what we're here for. We want our kids to grow, to experience success, to get those foundational skills ready, to move on to the next grade and, just be successful. Enjoy learning, knowing that they can do the hard stuff. So celebrate it. Growth is growth for both teachers and students. I have embedded a video if you do wish to go back and take a look at that. Okay, so you're probably thinking to yourself, oh, great, there's questions. You don't have to write these down if you don't want to. You can also just simply reflect on them, see what you come up with. And of course, I have included the answers if you wish to go back and look at them. So, what does this mean for this school? What can an instructional coach do for your school? Many schools here in the United States, my own included, use instructional coaches or literacy coaching, okay? This idea of student-centered coaching does not have to be narrow. It can be used across grade levels with individuals. It can be used with PLCs. It can be a whole group initiative, a whole school initiative. It really depends on what the school district is looking for and what the individual teacher is needing aid with. So how does this fit in then with the larger literacy initiatives that we are seeing pushed for? We are seeing a new word here called the science of reading, also known as SOAR. It's almost like the reading wars have came back. But student-centered coaching and literacy do go hand in hand. The science of reading is essentially a large body of research from various disciplines like cognitive, neural networks, that say, hey, this is how the brain learns to read, because the brain is not, it's not an innate talent. You're not born learning how to read. So you have to be taught. The important thing, though, is the science of reading is not a curriculum. It's not one instructional method. It is simply research that provides the foundation for effective instructional practices. Um, Now, that does not mean that it's not familiar to us. We are probably familiar with, the 5 pillars of reading, the simple view, and Scarborough's reading group. This here is also not an exhaustive list, but it includes a lot of our theories and foundational concepts that we see in teacher education programs. It provides a validity to the instructional methods that we choose. So, how does this then connect student-centered coaching? First and foremost, literacy coach, teachers and students, everyone has to know how to read to be able to succeed in the 21st century. So by utilizing SOAR, we're able to provide validity to our methodology, to our teacher craft, the art of teaching. We can say, this is why we teach phonics, or this is why we use visuals when we teach vocabulary. Not only that, but it provides a opportunity for quality instructional PDs. It also encompasses the idea of how to assist teachers in utilizing curriculum, how to implement it. Could also help with districts deciding if they want to purchase a curriculum. Not only that, but a key role of a literacy coach is the ability to help that teacher analyze student data, to kind of look at it and say, let's take a step back. Why is this child reading this way? What instructional practice that's backed by research can we use to help this student? After all, the student is the center of coaching. So, as for school improvement, yes, you want to have good people in the positions for your literacy or your instructional coach. You also want them to have knowledge of SOAR, of the science of reading. So, everyone in the school is aware of, using educational science to help them implement their teaching methods. It builds equity. It allows the teachers to have confidence in what they're doing. And it shows that you have a culture of collaboration against all levels and all departments. So I have prepared a example of a mini coaching cycle that I utilized this school year. So with that being said, how does my lesson align to the science of reading? Based upon my students' needs and the teacher I was working with, we decided that vocabulary knowledge was extremely low in our 6th grade students. And as we know, without a solid foundation of vocabulary, reading comprehension is going to be impacted. So what we did is we decided on a few instructional practices, like, teaching how to break apart the words, how to use context, the use of visuals to influence their meaning and their recall, and to build their fluency and prosody when they are reading aloud. So this mini coaching cycle was conducted in the last 9 weeks here in Florida. It was with an intensive reading group. There were around 16 students who had a variety of reading needs and levels. Out of the 16 students, only 13 participated in the coaching cycle due to the end of the year. Some students were not there to take the last post-assessment measuring their growth. So the 2 state standards that we partnered for were right here. They are ELA analyze the central idea, implied or explicit, and its development throughout a text, and to integrate academic appropriate to grade level in speaking and writing. So our very first thing is I worked with the teacher. She grabbed her data and we decided, looking at the trends and the analysis and how many students were struggling, we decided that our focus was going to be specifically vocabulary. And we were going to work to her two desired standards, which are right here. We knew that our focus of increased vocabulary instruction of both academic and domain-specific words would be to increase students' reading comprehension. The curriculum that we used to help plan our lessons and facilitate that was the Read 180 program, and particularly Unit 5, which dealt with contagion. So using the very first MAP test, which is utilized in conjunction with Read 180, we noticed that our students, there's 13 of them, were at various levels. We only really had one student who was exceeding the expectation. Most of our kids were sitting right here. So our goal was to kind of push each student forward to experience that success. So the very first lesson, the very first meeting, if you will, using the state standards, we sat down and we collaborated on what we wanted the students to do. We wanted to be able to say, this is what, for example, Sam can do when he leaves class. He can tell us if the central idea is stated right there in the text. He can offer us details. He can use the targeted vocabulary words that we have chosen in his writing and orally. We also created a student-centered reflective questions using the success criteria. That way students can monitor their own understanding of whether or not they're working toward mastery. So after collaborating, we sat down, we looked at the entire unit as a whole and decided that these were going to be our instructional practices and our methods to get our students to, move into that next instructional level. So there were 10 targeted vocabulary words that we targeted for explicit instruction. We selected 3 passages from the curriculum. We have also utilized 2 TDQ questions that are directly come from the text that the students have access to. We also decided that our best method for getting our students to have growth was to incorporate the following. Practice using the targeted words. Use them in conversations, use them in small groups, use them in written responses, a mixture of, whole group instruction and small group. We also wanted to include instruction in synonyms, antonyms, and the Freyer model to really, increase student understanding of how these words are being used to influence their comprehension. So some of the examples of the TDQs from the very first text I have given you all on screen. These come directly from the Read 180 program. So a big step of student-centered coaching is using formative data. The first lesson, once it is completed, once we had introduced those 10 targeted words, it was decided that we would come back and we would, share our observations that we made during the lesson. We would take a look at the students' work and we would kind of go through and see if we can spot trends. It was determined based on that first lesson that we would break the students into a small group to pull those who needed more explicit instruction, especially in how to read the words in context, some more strategies about how to break them apart, how to use context clues. it was decided that the teacher of record would teach that small group because she knows her students the best, and I would practice with the whole group students. Once again, we would all be using the same program, except for the small group would be using an independent text that would be accompanied with a graphic organizer. Once again, utilizing those target words. Using the end of year MAP assessment data, it was discovered that among the questions that the students answered, the TDQ questions, and the annotation guide that the students had been using. All of this, the reinforcement of the targeted words, the discussions, the Freyer models, the graphic organizers, we can clearly see that our instructional practices, are valid using the SOAR method, and it shows student growth. If you remember, we only had one student who was at target. We no longer have students who are emerging. Everyone is well on their path to developing and meeting their expectations. So there is a clear consensus of growth that our students made gains, if you will. This is exactly what you want to see with the student-centered coaching model. So you're probably thinking to yourself, oh, that sounds like a lot of work. And it can be. But one of the most important things that was used with fidelity, both by myself and the teacher of record, was the student centered coaching tool, which is a screenshot right here. And this probably was the most important way to plan. It was definitely instrumental in this. As you can see, it kind of takes you in step by step. Coaching log 1, identify your goal, which we did using the state standard goals for the students. We sat down, we broke down, what we wanted our students to do. We saw, this is the curriculum that we're going to be utilizing. These questions offer a great way to be reflective and allow for the instructional coach and the teacher to really work together to come up with a very solid, comprehensive plan that both of us can follow. Not only that, but it talks about how to create, your pre-assessment. It also talks about, are your targets written correctly? Are you trying to do too much? Are you doing too little? It really helps you guide the process. Another really efficient system that we decided that we couldn't live without during this process was the use of Google Calendar, Excel, and paper-based planning. We also communicated quite a bit through school email and Google Messenger. It's there's limited time during the day, so when we can use our internet tools, we definitely did. This is pretty much the end of my presentation, but before we wrap everything up, I did include a slide that had a lot of resources that I found particularly useful, not only in my day-to-day teaching, but also throughout this student-centered coaching process. This right here, this very first one, is Diane Sweeney's own website. There's great tools that are actually free to download to use if you wish to get started with the student-centered coaching model. I highly recommend that. So with that being said, that kind of draws our PD, for lack of a better word, to a close. I'm hoping that you'll leave this with a really strong understanding of how student-centered coaching can be utilized in your school, how it is backed by, the science of reading, sound instructional practices, and how there is an alternative to teacher-centered coaching, which, as we know, sometimes has negative connotations. I really hope you enjoyed this presentation and you learned something.